Let's talk about Genie. AI, BI Genie, and before that it was called...
Genie Spaces, data rooms. It's gone through a lot of names.
Got it. Okay, yeah.
The naming evolution is reflective of how early the product was, and both in Databricks and across the rest of the industry, right? Everyone's trying to crack this problem of how do I actually make it so that you can just use natural language and get answers from the data. And it may seem like initially just a pure sort of like ML inference problem of how do I take all the best context that you have and make sense of it and then just sort of give you answers based on that. But as we dug into it more, there was a very interesting sort of human-computer interaction problem that came with it, which is, well, all of the context around what the data means is actually in various people's heads. We've made folks go through this fairly rigorous sort of curation process, your semantic modeling processes, which tend to go from your business users calling up the data teams saying, hey, I need the model in this way. The data teams then putting it in a very specific format in a very specific place. And usually a few ticketing cycles later, you'll get it right. Whereas we'd like to try to make that a lot more fluid and a lot more sort of interactive between the business teams, the data teams, et cetera, but also still keep some of the goodness around governance that's the previous model that I just described had. So in order to do that, we basically needed to make sure that it's collaborative enough and interactive enough through Genie, where you can sort of interact with it and talk to it and clarify in real time, no, this is what I meant, or no, this is how that metric should have been calculated. But then also be able to save a subset of it as, okay, these are now verified useful instructions that I think other people are going to benefit from. So let me actually bake it into the space itself rather than just save it for myself.
I'm curious. So when it comes to the instruction side of things, could the argument be made that, well, if you're just going to have to instruct it, why not just build a dashboard covering these angles that you were covering with your instructions?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And our hope is that it's not going to be either or. If you're going to build a dashboard over time, what we're going to try to do is make it possible for you to just bring the context of that dashboard directly into its sort of complement Genie space. So that there's a Genie space that's sort of one-to-one with a dashboard that tries to answer the same questions, but deeper. And if you're building a dashboard and already offering those instructions, great, we're going to just bring it in. But if there's additional things needed, let's say there's a much deeper metric or there's a way of slicing and dicing that you're not facilitating through the dashboard because it might be too messy to do or it may not be as high value, well, that's what the Genie space is for. It's for the bottom 80, 90% of questions that you might otherwise not have the time to build a dashboard for.
What is Genie not intended to do?
Ultimately, Genie and dashboards are sort of two of the sides of our sort of business intelligence products. And the goal of these products are to enable everyone to make data-driven decisions. Now, those decisions may not include your personal vacation, hopefully, which means that Genie is not a general purpose chatbot. It's not meant for some of the things that you use things like ChatGPT for, things like, hey, go help me write an essay for school, or go help me plan my next vacation, or various things like that. It's more for your business analytics use cases.
There's not going to be a Genie is now AGI on the 2025?
I would be surprised in a very pleasant way. If it is AGI, we submit to our robot overlords, but we will see.
What has been the biggest challenge building Genie?
The biggest challenge for us has been trying to get the fastest feedback loop possible to improve Genie. And what I mean by that is ideally in a product like Genie, where the overriding goal is to make sure that every answer we deliver is as accurate and useful as possible, we want to actually make sure that we can very quickly tell when things are not accurate enough and improve and fix and come up with the right solutions. And also over time, prioritize which solutions we should build first to address larger classes of those things. However, and as with anyone who's built sort of enterprise software dealing with customer data knows, your customer's data is your customer's data. You're not going to touch it without their permission. That means that the feedback loop is actually not as tight as we would like to be for the majority of customers because they don't want us looking at their data, their queries, et cetera. And that is by design. And so one of the toughest challenges for us is actually constructing the right feedback loop using whatever sort of data and queries, et cetera, we are allowed to look at, as well as working with our customers to get a better sense for what kind of feedback can they provide us and are they comfortable giving to us at what fidelity so that we can tune things and improve things for their use cases.
Obviously, LLMs are the craze. Everyone wants to do something with them, whether it's SLMs, LLMs, whatever, right? There's a handful of buzzwords out there. Customers can obviously use ChatGPT for different purposes. What strategic advantage does Databricks have through the incorporation of these kinds of models inside of Databricks, and more specifically inside of Genie? Like, what's the strategic advantage versus someone saying, hey, I'm just going to build something on top of ChatGPT, for example?
Yeah. I mean, you are welcome to try. And I think in some cases that could be an interesting sort of experiment to run to answer that question for yourself. But I think for us, Databricks brings a couple of advantages, especially if you are already using other parts of the Databricks platform. For one, all of your data is there, all your metadata is there, all your governance is there. If you have any non-trivial use cases, it's not just going to be everyone's allowed to access everything. It's going to be much more nuanced around the marketing team's only allowed to access this, the finance team's only allowed to access this, et cetera. And so building an LLM product that has all that context and all that governance baked in out of the box without you having to sort of recreate any of that yourself is hopefully a big efficiency gain for anyone who's actually trying to do this. We've certainly had folks who are evaluating Genie as well as evaluating some of our Mosaic stuff in parallel. And a lot of the reason why they end up using Genie is, well, we've done a bunch of it for you. And you just have to sort of take care of the part where you tell us about your semantics, and you don't have to worry about a lot of the other setup and serving and stuff like that. And so, to me, that's a big win. And that's a big part of what I'm trying to do here, which is to make solutions like this a lot more accessible for a lot more businesses, a lot more people.
What has been the biggest failure in the process of building Genie?
We've had quite a few stumbles in terms of sort of iterations that didn't go as far as we'd like. Various things that we tried where we tried a particular feature, it didn't resonate with customers. We tried a particular thing that we thought we would improve accuracy by a fair bit, didn't pan out or didn't get adopted as easily as possible. So I think those are all in some ways necessary experiments, but you could call them failures in the sense that they didn't go as many places. I haven't actually quite gotten to one thing where it was a home goal of sorts, if you will, yet that was that obvious. In part because we're still pretty early, in part because we've been fairly deliberate about how we navigate, what experiments and what risks we take. And so, yeah, that's a tricky one for me to just identify one. We've certainly had failed experiments, but a lot of them were, in the grand scheme of things, intentional.
Taking that a little bit step forward, you would say, hey, realistically, right now, there's still a lot of experimenting going on. Absolutely. And really the final product might look significantly different, but the idea will stay kind of the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea that you have an LLM-backed way of being able to explore and ask questions of your data, where a lot of the curation from humans are going to be coming from the tell me about the context behind the data. That idea is going to stay. The shape of that idea in terms of what is the right human-computer interface, what are the right models, et cetera, we're going to evolve very rapidly. And a lot of it is going to be fueled by everyone's feedback. We're driven by what actually is useful for all of our customers. And so the more you tell us about that, the more we'll tune it for you.
What has been the biggest aha, or I can't believe this worked moment when it comes to Genie?
I would say one of the earlier pleasant surprises is we initially built Genie largely with sort of every test case being in English. And then we had a customer come in and be like, hey, we're Portuguese. It just worked. And I'm like, sweet, awesome. Let us know when it doesn't. And so like we're starting to get more and more of that feedback of like insert language X here. It just works. And like you've got interesting sort of corner cases. For example, we just had to fix a bug around sort of CJK, Chinese, Japanese, Korean input being handled incorrectly by the UI of all things. But the underlying model is surprisingly resilient to different languages, and it's been nice to see. I mean, there's nothing that tells us it shouldn't be, but it's good to see the validation that it is.
Any fun coming up ahead things on Genie that you're able to talk about?
Nothing immediately comes to mind. A lot of it is just natural evolution. There's a few things we have in the cooker that I can't quite talk about yet. That should be fun, but you'll see them soon.
That's fair enough.